So, welcome to the Business Spotlight Series. My name's Mark McNulty. I'm president of Action Coach Bluegrass in Southern Indiana. And today I have Colin Blake, who is the director of spirits education at Moonshine University and the Stave Thief Society. Um, Today we're going to be talking about his business, the journey to business, their business, their challenges, best practices, and share a peek into what it's like to operate a business. If this is your first time on the Business Spotlight Series channel, be sure to like and subscribe so you get future interviews just like this one. So, Colin, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Mark. I'm like this series. I think you're really focusing on a diverse group of businesses and individuals. So it's great to be here.
Awesome. So go ahead and tell our listeners about Moonshine University and the Stave Thief Society and how they're related and what it means to be a director of spirits education.
Absolutely. I'd love to tell people about how to be a completely fictitious, made up a title that I gave myself. Moonshine University is one of those really interesting places because it seems very tongue in cheek as far as the name, but it's actually a really serious place overall. So we are actually a sister company of a place called Flavor Man, which has been around for 31 years. um, Much larger, older company, and they do beverage development for businesses around the world. They've done thousands and thousands of beverages. Um, but a little bit into that journey, about 13 years ago, the owner of Flavor Man was at a spirits conference teaching about flavored vodka. And he pretty quickly realized, oh, there's a whole bunch of people who are about to get into distilling. And at present, all of these people are essentially Googling their way into business, which is not really what you want to do when you were getting into the second most regulated industry in America after pharmaceutical. Yahoo Answers is not the most trusted source when your finances and tax liability is on the line. So he had been sitting on a building right next to Flavor Man for several years and just didn't know what to do with it. And came back to the team and said, you know what? There's about to be a huge craft distilling boom. So we're going to open a distillery. And everybody was like, it's amazing. Great. What are we going to do? What are we going to make? And he's like, nothing. We're just going to teach people how to open distilleries. And we're like, oh, okay. So opening a distillery is a very, very expensive endeavor. So the thought of building a distillery and not producing anything was very interesting to us at the time. But Dave, the owner, is very much a visionary in that sense. And we started building out, we started putting together a rough sketch of the initial curriculum. And when we opened our doors in 2012, it was right at the beginning of that craft boom. So we opened Moonshine University with what is our flagship class, which is the 6-day distiller course. And that course is an intense 6 days. It's 65 hours of activity. There's 35 different presenters. We go over soup to nuts, everything you need to know to open, run, and operate a distillery. We get into site selection, zoning, compliance, build out, getting your permit, state compliance, distribution. We do hands-on distillation of whiskey, gin, rum, vodka, and many other topics therein. From that one class alone, we've had about 1,500 different students from 51 different countries, all 50 states, and we've helped about 300 distilleries open around the world. So we're super proud of that class, those offerings. But pretty quickly after we started offering that 6-day distiller course, people were coming to us and saying, you know, I really enjoyed that class, but fermentation, I want to know more than what you taught in an hour. Whiskey production, gin production. So we pretty quickly started putting together 2 and 3 day deep dive classes
Okay.
in all these different aspects that we were teaching during the 6 day, and really just started building our schedule out overall. So now we have a variety of about 12 to 15 different topics, depending on the year, that we teach a few times a year that get into agave spirits, fermentation, whiskey production, botanical spirits, barrel aging, just a whole variety of different things. And that has really filled out our schedule as far as professional classes overall. But then in 2015, we launched a program called the Stave Thief Society. And that is something that we put together because we saw that there was a need in this region for bourbon education, because we kept hearing time and time again, people would go to places like Napa, and you could go anywhere in Napa. You could stop at the gas station and ask someone, well, where around here has this type of wine? And they could answer the question and send someone there. And we didn't have that broad scale education here. There were people who, a handful of people who were extremely knowledgeable, and then there were a lot of people who thought they were very knowledgeable, but not with accurate information. So, being that we made no product whatsoever, we could be brand neutral. So we put together the Stave Thief Society, which is a bourbon certification program. It ultimately got adopted by the Kentucky Distillers Association, which is the big trade association
Mhm.
for bourbon distilleries here in Kentucky. And they adopted it as their official bourbon education. So we knew we were doing something right with that. But that is a intense day-long course where you come, hang out with us. You do hands-on bourbon making in our distillery. You get a 36 aroma sensory kit where we train you on best sensory practices, how to get better at sensory. We have a variety of different flights you go through to actually learn and understand what's happening with bourbon production and how to actually pick these things out and become a more educated taster and just bourbon enthusiast overall. And I say enthusiast because that's primarily who we serve at this point. But it's probably about 35 to 40% industry people, people from distilleries, distributors, people in some direct or ancillary way attached to the spirits industry. But we get a lot of enthusiasts overall. When we first launched that program, we thought we were going to have 1 or 2 classes a year and teach local bartenders about bourbon. But by the second class, it was already mostly enthusiasts. And we went from 2 classes in the first year to pre-COVID, I taught 36 classes that year. And we're slowly building back up to right around that level overall. So huge interest there. So between the professional side at Moonshine University, the more enthusiast, even though there is a professional aspect to the Stave Thief Society, that keeps us pretty busy. And then we also fill in all of the gaps we have in our schedule with professional services, professional sensory services, on and off-site consulting, gin development, whiskey development, private barrel programs. So overall, our very small team of 4 here at Moonshine University stays pretty busy year round.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So tell me a little bit more about the private barrel program.
So the private barrel program is something we put together because, and we launched that about 6 years ago. We still had a lot of gaps in our schedule because we were still fairly young at that point. And we thought, well, there's all these different private barrel selection programs out there. You can go to Jim Beam, Woodford Reserve, and pick a private barrel there. But that program was a 2 to 3 hour experience. You go in, you get to taste a handful of pre-selected barrels, pick yours, and then they bottle it for you, and off you go with it. which are all fantastic programs. I am not speaking ill of those. They're great. But we saw the opportunity to do a much deeper dive and more experiential type
Mhm.
of experience. So what we put together was a 6-day experience where people come in and they're going to make their own barrel of whiskey, but they literally get to make every single decision about it.
Okay.
And they get to do the production themselves. So they come in, we train them on individual grains, how to develop a mash bill. They make their own mash bill. Then they actually get to do 2 cooks. They get to pick their own yeast strain, pick all the metrics. They get to go to Kelvin Cooperage and actually physically make their own barrel and toast it and char it themselves. They get to do the stripping runs, the spirit runs. They get to make the heads, hearts, and tails cuts. They get to pick the barrel entry proof and fill their barrel. And throughout those 6 days, myself and our operations manager, Clay, walk them through every single step. They do in-depth training so that they can't make a poor decision. And really, Clay and I are here as when you go bowling with kids and they put the bumpers in so you can't go into
Right.
the gutter. That's me and Clay. So they
Ah,
can't actually make something that's going to be bad because we
mhm.
will keep them from hitting that point. But at the end of the week, they get to fill a barrel. It's theirs. We put it up in a rick, and every 6 months they get a sample of it. And when they ultimately deem that it is ready to bottle, they will come back here. We're going to go through some training exercises as far as determining the best bottle proof for that bourbon. And then we actually bottle it up, label it, and off they go with their barrel of bourbon that they made the mash bill for. They picked the yeast strain. They made every decision. They produced it themselves. So it's a much different experience overall. It's 6 days up front, and then it's at present everybody who has a barrel that's come through this program hasn't pulled it out of the rick yet. So the oldest one is approaching 6 years, and we have a whole variety that are much younger. But so you do the week, and then you're waiting 4+ years to determine I'm
Right.
ready. This bourbon's ready. Let's bottle it and finish it up.
Okay. That's great. So, so tell me a little bit about how you market your business. Because you've got so many different target markets, right? On the flavor man side, on the distillery side, and then on the bourbon steward side. So, tell me a little bit about how do you get the word out? How do people find you?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I do really feel for the marketing team, and that's actually where I came up through this business. I was originally the creative director at Flavor Man before coming over to the Moonshine University side, and that team is marketing and promoting so many different services in so many different ways because the Flavor Man side is business to business. So you're looking for a very specific targeted demographic. But the one thing we learned with Flavor Man very early on is have personality, do above and beyond, and be the best. And really, you grow a reputation, and reputation really brings you forward because so much of what happens at Flavor Man is people reaching out and being like, I've heard of you, or so and so said that I need to reach out.
Mhm.
Um, and that is because over time they put together an amazing collection of services. So it's beyond just developing the drink, selling the flavor. They do shelf life studies, they do production support, they do everything you need, which is really unique because no other company does that collection of services. So really, you can just go over there not knowing anything beyond I made this in my kitchen, and have experts over there lead you through the entire process. So putting together an interesting, comprehensive collection of services and just building a great reputation is key. And of course, there's the traditional, SEO marketing model and identifying those entrepreneurs and going after them is a big
Right.
part of what they do over at Flavorman. At Moonshine University, very much the same thing. We are going after at least initially, we were going after a very specific demographic of entrepreneurs who were looking to get into the distilling industry. So it's a really hard demographic to identify. I would say that for 5 years, we kind of just flailed, tried to figure it out, how to capture the data that really was our target audience. But we partnered with a couple great companies who helped us figure that out and really dial it in. But a
Mhm.
lot of it is also reputation. Um, I remember starting here and, being told, okay, you're going to work at Moonshine University. And all I could think was, oh man, I have to say I work at Moonshine University. And that is it's so tongue in cheek. It's so like, oh, there's this really cringy aspect of it. Um, but the team that came up with the name, they were brilliant because they knew it would it would stick. It is such a sticky name. It's not like all these other things you hear where it's just like Hopper and Barrel Spirits Company. Everybody was doing the same kind of hoi polloi average
Right.
type of naming, and they were just like, no one's gonna forget this name. You're gonna say it once, they're not gonna forget it, and that was true. So really, me and the initial team here, our big big goal the first 2 to 3 years was build a reputation to where Moonshine University was the reputation and not the name. And I feel we did a really good job with that because now we see it on resumes, we see it on people's websites, we see it in articles constantly. People are talking about how proud they were to come here and get an
Right.
education that helped them open their distillery or become better or where they send their staff. Um, to come here. So building that relationship with people and building the reputation was really big for us. Um, because now when I say, I'm from Moonshine University, I don't have to explain what it is and that it's not moonshine. It's actually a super serious place.
Right.
Um, and we're super proud of that. Again, when you've helped over or almost 300 distilleries open in 51 different countries, you're doing something good and you have a pretty good global network that thinks of you highly.
Right. So as you built out, the reputation of Moonshine University, what were some of the roadblocks or hurdles that maybe a memorable one or two that you had to overcome as you built that reputation and overcame oh, that's a funny name or
So the biggest challenge we had is we knew we wanted to do distillery education and spirits education, but we didn't know who our audience was. We knew to one extent we are looking for entrepreneurs who want to open distilleries. But that demographic is only going to take up 15% of our calendar year. So,
right.
how do we fill the rest of the time? What does that demographic look like? And I will say we went through 2 years of throwing spaghetti at the wall. I put together endless different classes and taught them that were enthusiast focused, that were very specific topics that turned out no one cared about. And it took time of just constantly putting out different types of classes, different structures, different lengths to find out who we were. So it was an unfortunate but great thing that we got to find our identity as we grew. Because we found out over time our core competencies were hands-on distilling and sensory training. And that's not anything we really thought of other than we're educators out of the gates.
Right.
But as we kept going and trying different things, we found, oh, well, these classes are failing because they don't have hands-on distilling. These classes are failing because we don't have sensory. So we found that if we didn't have one of those two things, it really wasn't for us. But that was something that we found just by doing. And I came from an entertainment and arts background, and came from LA, and just had a lot of comedian friends. And the common phrase that comedians use is you don't know who you are as a comedian until you've been on stage 100 times.
Okay.
And that's something that really stuck with me, because we kept putting on classes time and time again, and took 2 to 3 years to find out who we were as a company. And luckily, we came out of the gate with the 6-day distiller course, which was very popular and hit. So it gave us the latitude to play with other classes until we found out who we were.
Okay. Awesome. So, got a lot of really good information. This has been really educational for me too, as a bourbon fan and collector. I've been aware of the Bourbon Steward program for a while, and I've got some friends who are have got amazing palates, and and have been through your program. And
Oh,
someday
we need to get you through the program.
someday I'll get in there too. Um, and when I've got some spare time, you know how that goes.
Oh, very much. Carving out an entire day is
Yeah.
hard, and I very much understand
But
that.
so kind of my last few questions here for you. So what do you think has been your number one key to success that other entrepreneurs could maybe learn from?
I have said this since day one. As my team has changed over time, we have put together some of the best collections of classes with the best uh, experts in topics. How we present things is very original, because every single person that works at Moonshine University actually has an arts background, not a science background. So
Okay.
we approach everything as, we are going to educate the hell out of people, but we're going to entertain them as well. So no one's ever in the seat longer than an hour and a half. We do hands-on. How we teach is very big and has a lot of personality. So we came at it from an avenue of, we need to have personality and teach people in a way that they're going to easily learn and absorb it. But more than anything, and I say it every single time, we are not in the education world. We are not in the sensory world. We are not in the distilling world. We are in the hospitality world. We service every other thing we do through hospitality. So everyone here is as friendly, as chatty. Anyone can call up, whether they've come here or not, and just ask questions and talk. It is number one about hospitality, and it comes from a truly authentic and altruistic place. And I think people feel that because everybody who works here loves this industry. We
Mhm.
love this industry, and we want to make sure two things. Anybody who's going to enter it is going to thrive in this industry, and anybody who is going to enter it needs to understand what this industry is and what you need to be. AKA, if you're an asshole, we don't want you.
Right. So we've coined the term edutainment as that combination of education and entertainment, because that's how you make it stick. And it's that adds that hospitality flavor to it.
Absolutely. And honestly, we have found, because over time, we have honed in on presenters who are not only just the top of their field, but they could talk to a wall and they can explain anything at the lowest level. And we've had people come in here that are the best experts in the world, but they couldn't lower how they
Right.
talked to people, or they were just soporific. And I mean, the reality is there's some topics, like finding someone who's an expert on TTB, which is the Tax and Trade Bureau, all the government
Mhm.
licensing and compliance. Finding someone who's charismatic, who's an expert in TTB compliance
Yeah.
took a few years, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. How to get your label approved, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting, but we always had that goal of, man, we are keeping people here for really long days. We are shoving a ton of information at them constantly. We need to make it as sticky as possible. And the best way to do that is have big personalities, really smart, entertaining people, and a lot of what we push on presenters if they don't do it naturally is explain what you're talking about, and what the science is or the fundamental is, then give that example, a real world example, so people understand the practical application. So we're really big on teach it to them, give them a real world example, and then generally, depending on what it is, do hands-on practicum or sensory practicum to reinforce it.
Okay. So what's a book that you would recommend to a bourbon aficionado or a distilling aficionado? And it doesn't have to be bourbon; it can be, right. So what's a book that you've read or you're reading about the industry that you would recommend to others?
That is a great question from someone who views those books from a very different way.
Right.
I think there are a couple tasting books where they go beyond tasting notes,
Mhm.
um, and really get into kind of how they're made and how those flavors are done. Um, Mike Veach has a great book on it. Uh, oh, why can't I remember this gentleman? He's one of the New York Times editors, and I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Uh,
You
I'll
can
think of
email
it.
me his name and I can put it in the write up.
Yeah. So those are great, but I think really what I love right now is people who are writing books that explain the process, where they're stripping away all the BS marketing stories that you hear. And I think Matt Strickland um has written two books, one on barrel aging, one on distilling, and they are the most easy to understand while giving you crushingly in-depth information.
Okay.
And I think he is a brilliant speaker, one of the most kind people in the industry. And those two books are
Mhm.
so helpful for both the enthusiast and professional alike. I can't speak higher of them.
Okay.
And while I love a lot of the books out there, um, like Mike Veach is very history heavy. So if you want history, read Mike Veach.
Right.
But then there's other people who get into production, but it's more of a how I've understood it from distillery tours
Okay.
type of understanding, which are good. They have their place. Um, and then there's a lot more books coming out from people who are servicing themselves more than the industry, and they're trying to build a personal brand. And I don't think highly of those books because it's too much of a what I think, my opinion,
Right.
which doesn't give you any real information unless you buy into the celebrity of who that person is. And I don't
Right.
think that services the industry in a great way. And obviously, I'm in a very unique position where if it doesn't benefit the industry as a whole, I don't really care about it.
So, all right. Second and last question to your ability to be able to share this. Where do you see Moonshine University going in the next, say 3 to 5 years? What's next for you guys?
It's interesting because we have been really fortunate that we have been riding a wave of craft distilling boom and just growth, more and more distilleries, but that's going to end at some point. So we know we're always going to have some service to people who are looking to open and run distilleries, but we are also very aware that we're entering a time where we're going to have to shift from helping people open distilleries to training people who are currently working in the field.
Okay.
So we're cognizant of the slow transition of becoming, the
Mhm.
supporting entrepreneurs to supporting um, continued education
Right.
overall. And we know that we're going to be offering more and more professional services. There's not a lot of places people can go that have trusted palettes and knowledge to learn how to, well, I'm doing a startup or I added a piece of equipment. Who can come
Right.
in and make sure this is working correctly and our process works and we can update our SOPs, or a place where people can send product, like here's our new make. Is it good?
Mhm.
What's going on? Or what we mostly get with sensory, because when I talk to people and I'm like, yeah, I do a lot of sensory as part of my job, they're like, oh, you just get to sit around and drink cool things all day. I'm like, no one sends us things when things are going right.
Right. Yeah.
We get sent the worst things in the world. So having a place where, the staff here that does sensory, we're all trained on faults, flaws. We know where they came from, how they got developed, how they can be blended off, if they can be blended off,
Right.
where they likely came from. So we're really good at those types of professional sensory feedback. So we're gonna do more and more of that. And Stave Thief is growing like crazy. So
Yeah.
we know we're also going to be doing more and more kind of public facing enthusiast
Okay.
education as we grow as well.
Okay. Awesome. Great. All right. So last question for you today, Colin. What inspires you the most today?
So what inspires me the most is people who are thinking about the overall experience and
Mhm.
how to make that connective to those people who come through. So I think what we do here is a unique thing for the industry, and we do it in a very fun way. But as we are starting to work with more and more distilleries, and the number one feedback we hear from people who visit distilleries is all the tours kind of sound the same. We're kind of hearing the same thing. So what really inspires me is people who are approaching the visitors experience and
Mhm.
the on-site education in very new and different ways, because that's going to be the largest challenge moving forward. And seeing some people who are really thinking about it differently and giving people a different experience is amazing to me, because it's the largest challenge out there, is how to stand out when you're
Mhm.
looking at, 2000 plus distilleries in the US right now. How do you tell a different story? How do you give a different experience than what someone who's into distilleries has
Right.
experienced a dozen times before? Um, so I'm really in admiration of the people building those unique experiences.
Okay. All right, awesome. Thank you. I love that. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Colin Blake, Director of Spirits Education at Moonshine University and the Stave Thief Society. He's covered a lot of stuff. If you're interested in, how a business can pivot to meet the needs of its bigger audience, as Flavorman has done, over the years, and their big, a big pivot to open up and literally create a whole new market, then bookmark this one, listen to it a couple times, whether you're in the distilling industry or any other industry. There's a lot of lessons to be learned here, from how to find your market and how to find new markets and build new markets, and just create whole new categories, which is really kind of what Flavorman has done here with Moonshine University, created no whole new category. So Colin, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I admire anyone who can listen to me talk nonstop for as long as you have.
Well, thank you again so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Colin Blake, and this has been the Business Spotlight Series. Bookmark us so that you don't miss any future updates. And we'll see you on the next interview, everybody. Bye. Thanks.